Hello, my name is Griffiths. I work in Power Systems, Advanced Technology Support in IBM Europe. In this movie, we'll be looking at the Simplified Remote Restart. After you set it up, you can access this via the HMC or by PowerVC. The previous release of Remote Restart, we now call it the complicated one, was available with Power 7. With Power 8, we now have the Simplified Remote Restart, and it's a lot simpler to set it up and to operate. It does require Power 8 machines. I recommend the latest HMC and firmware, and we're going to switch on SSR at the HMC. To do this does require a reboot of the virtual machine, so sorry about that. I know we don't like rebooting images. So it's as simple as 1, 2, 3. We can get live partition mobility working because it does require all that same functionality, and if live partition mobility is not working, you'll never get remote restart to work. Then we set those virtual machines or LPARs ready for remote restart, and then we can do some validation to make sure that we've got a good chance of it operating. The 4, 5, 6 is perhaps you want to go one level deeper and actually test that it works. We'll show you how to do that on the HMC with PowerVC. And perhaps, unless you've got a very small computer room with 1 or 2 machines with only a handful of LPARs, if you've got larger machines or lots of them with many LPARs running, then perhaps you need to do some sort of pre-planning and prioritization of which logical partitions you'd want to move and where to put them in the case of you having a ghastly accident and the machine goes down. So I'm going to quickly go through a couple of reminders about live partition mobility. This is when the partition, the virtual machine or LPAR is running, we're actually going to move that to a different computer. We have to set it up, the target virtual machine, and then actually move the memory across. And there's a note at the bottom that this has been operating for many years now. It's not breaking news or technology, and we've had many iterations and improvements over the years. We used to call it dead partition mobility, but it's officially called static partition mobility. So we could shut down the LPAR and then move it. That's nice and quick because there's no memory to move on the fly, so it rebuilds it and it's ready to boot up on the target machine. If you like, now we're going to have this sort of zombie partition mobility. We actually got an LPAR. It was running. It's gone down because the machine it was running went down, and then we're going to rescue it from the grave, from the dead machine, and start it again on an alternative machine. Live partition mobility does require that you've purchased PowerVM Enterprise Edition. Then you've got to have spare capacity when you're moving the virtual machine to a new machine. It's got to actually have some CPU memory and some connectivity to actually do that operation. Keep those VO servers and HMCs up to date. I mentioned this already, but let's cover that now. In the latest edition, when I'm making this video, we have the HMC 840 and the firmware 840 and the VO server 224. All of these together have quite a lot of improvements that have helped the live partition mobility operate faster, do more of it concurrently, and a lot more checking before it actually does the migration. So you can check that in advance. So it's well worth having everything up to date before you try using the remote restart. Of course, everything, your virtual machines have to be pure virtual networks and virtual disks. We should know that already. And the source and target machines need the same subnet access to the networks and access to the disks or LUNs or whatever technology you're using for your virtual disks. A couple of gotchas, some of them get me all the time. I use these virtual DVDs quite a lot from the VO server, and you can just delete that if you're finished with it. So the logical memory block size can catch you out as well. Each one machine, depending on how much memory in it, could end up with a different logical memory block size. Typically it's about 1/1000th of the size of the memory, but they have to be the same on the source and the target machine. You have to change that in the ASME menu and reboot the server to get that done, so it's good to do that when the machine initially arrives. Also, of course, if you've got the latest Power 8 features and you've got your virtual machines in Power 8 mode, then you can't move them to a Power 7 machine because it doesn't understand the extra Power 8 features. You can go up, of course. If you have a Power 8 machine and the VM is running in Power 7 mode, then you can move it to older hardware, the Power 7 hardware. Okay, so also with your Linux on Power Partitions, if you haven't added the IBM packages that allow the dynamic LPARs to work, then you won't be able to use live partition mobility. And just a little bit of best practice in here. The faster the network, then the faster live partition mobility works. You can have a dedicated Ethernet if you want to. Flirt's good for getting yourself up to the latest releases of our software. There's 2 checklists for the first time you tried LPM, and for subsequent ones to check that you're ready to go. You can find those on these 2 links. I'll put these on the YouTube website so you can click them directly. There's the VO server performance guideline, worth having a look there to make sure your VO servers are performing nicely and have the spare capacity to run live partition mobility. And don't forget the old IBM Advisor, it's a part command on the VO server. Gives you lots of very quick, simple hints and tips about things you can actually improve your VO server with, particularly if you run that during a busy period. It even tells you the commands to run to get these things fixed. Okay, enough about LPM. Let's just assume that's ready to go. Let's get on with the remote restart features. First thing to do is check that your machine is capable of that. So if you click on the machine on the HMC and the properties, then you go to capabilities. You're looking for this one down in here, Partition Simplified Remote Restart Capable. That's the one we're after. The older one, what we now call the complex remote restart, this is one up in here. So don't get those two confused. If you only just find this one, then you don't have the simplified remote restart available to you. So how do you actually set this remote restart flag? Well, you can't do this at the OS, the VO server, or the HMC either interface, although it does look like you can in some places. You currently have to use the command line interface. Now, with newer versions of the HMC, we may have a graphical user interface to do this, but at the moment, not. We have to go to the command line. So I'm going to assume you know how to get to the Hardware Management Console command line. You can SSH to it and use the same user and password as you can with the graphical user interface. So first then we're going to check with this command the list system configuration at the LPAR level. We give it the machine and the name of the LPAR we're wanting. So my practical worked example here is my machine is called P8 Lime and the virtual machine is called VM61. Lots of interesting information in here. If you've never been here before, you can find out the version of the operating system running and a whole load of setup details of the VM. This is the one we're not interested in here, the remote restart. This is the old complex one. We're looking for simplified remote restart. This is an example where it has been set already and the virtual machine has been restarted. It's remote restartable. If you're in here for the first time, this will be a 0 and there'll be something else in here, or not applicable or something like that in here. Another option is to do it for the same operation for the whole machine. So here we've got the name of the machine and we're saying limit the output to just the simplified remote restart capable and the name of the LPAR. And so we can see here all my partitions, including my VO servers in here. The only one that's set to capable is my VM61, which is a nice quick way of looking at whole machines at a time. If you want to set this is the command. We're going to change the system config, the name of the server, the name of the partition. Notice these double quotes in here, and we're going to set this one to a 1. It will be a 0 if it's off. And we can, if we want to disable this later on, we can do the same thing but with a 0. Now there is a warning here. The developers are very cautious, and they tell us that there is a CPU overhead of switching this on the HMC, as it regularly collects data from the VO server. I haven't seen it use any CPU time. I've only got some small machines. If you've got very large machines, something to be aware of. Perhaps you'd want to track your HMCs to see if the CPU consumption goes up. It's not doing this all this time. It's not a large overhead. It's doing it occasionally. Maybe when it's ready you change something on the VO server, it gets updated, or maybe you've changed the config on the HMC of an LPAR. Perhaps it then does a double check with the VO server to get the latest details. Now once it's set, you can use the classic HMC graphical user interface, and you can see it's activated down in here. This is the general properties of a virtual machine. On the new Enhanced Plus, we can see down here it has remote restart. Again, the general properties of a particular logical partition. This is the one that makes it look like you could set it, but it's grayed out. You can't actually click this button. Again, in future releases, maybe they'll make that available to us. Once you set that flag, don't forget you have to restart your virtual machine or your LPAR. Otherwise, this won't go into remote restartable, and that means that you cannot actually do the SSR. So next up, we'll do the validation to check that we'll actually be able to do the remote restart where we want to. We can do this at the LPM level or the simplified remote restart level. We'll do both in this case. You'll see that there's a bit of overlap in here. Okay, so we should know this already. Select your virtual machine from the HMC interface, operations, mobility. I prefer doing the validate directly without trying to do migrate. The migrate will actually do a validation check as it starts, so then you can then go on and do the migrate later. But let's do validate. This is a nice panel because it does ask you in one go what you want to do. So here you have the machine, the source machine, the virtual machine, and then in this button there's a pop down in here so you can select the machine you actually want to move it to. In this case we're going to the Emerald machine. Then you click the validate button, gives you a little pop-up saying I'm getting on with this, and eventually comes up with either everything's okay, or in this case we've got some warnings. If you have errors, then it will not do the live partition mobility. Warnings, though, you should have a look at the details in here. In this example it's saying the target machine doesn't support hardware accelerated active memory expansion. Now that's okay if we actually using it at all, but it means that we'll have to use the software acceleration of active memory expansion. That'll work quite happily. Anyway, the bottom two down in here regarding these complaining the 4 CCs, we see these all the time. It's saying the slot numbers it's using on the target machine are actually that it wants to use are actually already in use, so it'll have to use a different slot number. I'm sorry, I can't get excited about maintaining slot numbers. My brain's got better things to do, so again I'm happy that the slot numbers will be changed. So then let's do the validation via the simplified remote restart. So we go back to the HMC command line interface, and this is the command that we're going to use to do the validate. This is the command we actually use to do the remote restart as well. Somebody wasn't quite thinking about this. This is remote restart start. LPAR, source box, the LPAR that we're going to move, and the target box. Same sort of parameters as we had in the graphical user interface. So here's my worked example. Here's my source machine, my virtual machine, and my target machine. And oh look, those are the same error messages that we saw before. Yes, it is doing a check just like the live partition mobility, so you don't have to do both of these tests really. The nice thing is that the rrStartlpar command does a live partition mobility validate, but it also does some other things like checking that the remote restart flag is set and that you're in restartable mode. Otherwise it will give you error messages, as you can see down in here. It might check other things, I have no idea, but it's probably worth doing just this one if you're going to do one or the other. Now here's the syntax for this remote restart start LPAR command. We've looked at validate, we'll look at restart in a second when we actually do it. And there's a cleanup operation in here. We have the manage and target machines, and we can use partition name or a partition ID if we want. There's a whole bunch of options which were used for the complicated restart. There's a couple at the bottom that you may want to have a little fiddle with, but you can read up in the manual pages to actually find out more information about those. These are the official prerequisites. Some of these we've covered before, so I'll whiz through those. Got to have the same network and disks, of course. We have to have at least 820 HMC and matching firmware, but I'd recommend 840 or later if that's available by the time you're watching this video. The machines must be remote restart capable. We've covered that already. Both machines must be managed by the same HMC. That's beyond the requirements for live partition mobility. It could have two HMCs involved. Another important one is the HMC must have a connection to the service processor. And the service processor must be actually available, powered up and running. This is a very important check because it needs to know that the box is powered off, so it knows that the LPAR is not running. If it can't make that check, it is extremely worried that perhaps the network to the service processor is broken. And if it does the remote restart, you could end up with two LPARs talking to the same disks. That is catastrophic for your file system. It would immediately, very quickly, trash your file systems, and you'd have to reach for a tape to work around that. Also, that the source machine must be in one of these modes, error, power, or error dump in progress state for the remote restart to work. Fortunately, if you power off the machine at the HMC, you end up in power off mode, so you can do a passive test of this. We'll look at that in a minute. At the LPAR level, then we must have the restart capable switched on, and we must have restarted the virtual machine so we're in a remote restartable state. Officially, at the time this came out, it didn't support the shared storage pools. I'm a big fan of that, so I've been working with the shared storage pools. It works fine for me, but officially that is not supported. Worth checking if you want to use the shared storage pool. Now let's pretend that we actually gone down. Bang! Machine exploded, or something disastrous happened to it, powered itself off. It's sitting there in the computer room. Well, we go back to the HMC command line interface and we run the same command we did for the validate, but this time we're going to use restart in here. Alternatively, if your machine names and your virtual machine names are big, long, complicated hexadecimal numbers, very easy to get wrong, perhaps you'd actually want to define on the HMC some variables, and then you can use the variables in here, or if you're scripting, that might be a good way of running to make sure you get the right machine and the right virtual machine over to the right target. This works just fine. Like partition mobility, you can go to the HMC and watch it go through the various phases of creating the LPAR, setting up the resources, talking to the VO server to connect up the right networks and disks, then restarting it. Because it's not having to move memory, the machine is down, there is no memory to move over, it's nice and quick, and it automatically restarts the virtual machine on the other end at the end of the live partition mobility for you. So this is really nice, works very well. Now I was going to actually capture a movie of it actually happening. My little LPAR here actually happens so fast, there's barely anything you can recognize. You see a couple of codes changing on the HMC and it starts up. If you had a very big, perhaps a big database or something with many disks and many networks attached, it will take a little bit longer to configure it up. But it's essentially exactly the same as you get with live partition mobility, so we'll skip that. Now there is something to bear in mind, that we have some debris on the source machine. The machine is down, so we can't delete the LPAR like live partition mobility do on the source machine. It's not possible. It was powered off, so we can't actually change the details of the LPARs, and the VO server was shut down, so we can't do that part either. Now if we did try to do that and we just ran the command to do the cleanup operation and the machine was down, we get an error message saying the machine is not in the right state if we need to power it on. If we then tried it again and the VO servers aren't running, it will say no, we can't do that because the VO servers aren't there. I need to communicate to those to detach the resources to the LPAR we're trying to delete. If you power up the machine and start up the VO servers and let it settle down, give it a couple of minutes, and then you do the cleanup operation. In my case, my small LPAR, it took a couple of seconds to actually do that operation. If it's much bigger, it may take 10 or 20 seconds to actually do that operation. Then we're in a nice clean state. The machine that is actually down, we've moved the LPAR off and the LPAR isn't on the original machine anymore. Now you might think at that point we're all done. We've covered it, and if you just wanted to see how it operates, then it's okay. But there's a couple of other things I want to go through. One is, how would we actually test it's going to work properly in advance of it actually happening, and we want to do some preparation for when it happens, particularly for large machines with lots of LPARs and lots of possible targets. So let's think about testing. There's a couple of little things you may not be aware of. Assuming everything's set up nicely, we need to get to the power off state. We can do that business as usual, shut down the virtual machines, shut down the VO servers, and shut down the machine on the HMC. That gets us to power off and ready for our testing. Some people may say, hang on, that's cheating a little bit, isn't it? Because you've done an orderly shutdown, everything was flushed out to the disk and stopped. In an emergency, it's going to be a much messier shutdown than that. Well, there's a couple of things you could try if you really want to. You could yank out the power cords. We need to talk to the service processor, so you have to push the power cords back in, and make sure you haven't got auto restart set up, so that it doesn't start up the virtual I/O servers and start up the virtual machine again. That little warning there. If you've ended up with the HMC to service processor network unplugged, the HMC will just see the machine as unknown, and that won't be available for a simplified remote restart. You could just, without shutting down the VO servers and the virtual machines, just power off the server. And as far as I'm aware, that does a fairly nasty immediate shutdown of the machine without giving the VO servers and the VM a chance to clean up. So that's another way of doing that. Up to you which you go for. Then, as we've seen, you can do the rrStartlpar restart command. This should return fairly quickly. and you can watch that as you take over onto the target machine. Be ready with that. If you have to log into the HMC, it'll be done by the time you get to the right screen, and it will start up the virtual machine automatically. Don't forget, if it fails, you have to do this rrStartlpar recover command. We haven't really covered that. The problem is I've never found it failing at that point. But do remember the recover, if it does fail to actually do the restart, you can do a recovery, in which case it will then try and put it back to the original machine. Hopefully you can either retry the remote restart, or you can actually get the original machine up and running and just run it as normal on its home machine. Don't forget, after you've seen the remote restart work, then you'd want to start your machine, start your VO servers, let it settle down, and then use the cleanup command to remove the original source LPAR. Now there is another way. If you set everything up as we did before, but instead of actually invoking the remote restart on the HMC command line interface, we can actually do that in the PowerVC graphical user interface. The button you're looking for here is the remotely restart virtual machines. This appears or becomes ungrayed out when you actually click on a powered off host machine that is ready to do the remote restart. The prerequisites for this are a little bit higher than the base SRR itself. I recommend, of course, we go to the latest PowerVC and the latest VO servers and the latest firmware and HMC. Now here we go then. We clicked on a particular machine. Here's our old line machine again. It's in the powered off state, and we can see the button in here, and we click on that to actually activate the things. It says, well, in this case, this is the only LPAR that is ready for remote restart, so we can select our LPAR and then do the remote restart operation. It then says, well, where do you want to go? And it gives you a list of the compatible machines where it could be moved to. You select your host machine and click on the remote restart. Yeah, then typical of PowerVC, it throws that into the background. It gives you a little message that will get back to you when it's actually happened. On the screen, you can see there it's rebuilding. It's doing the same sort of thing, and again it's a bit of an anticlimax. It doesn't take very long to actually rebuild it and start it up on the target machine. Now PowerVC does a little bit of housekeeping for you. On the original machine, it will check every 2 minutes, I'm being told, that if once the machine is up and the VOs are started, and it will automatically do the cleanup operation for you. You don't have to log on and sort that out yourself. I quite often get asked, is this like PowerHA basically on the cheap? That's great, we don't have to buy PowerHA. Well, let's make a few observations on that. This is classic PowerHA, or HACMP as I still call it. We have a working machine in here connected to the disks. It's happily busily working on here. If we have an incident of many types, but it just means the working machine is gone, then the standby machine over its heartbeat will say, okay, the other guy's gone, I'll take over the disks and I'll restart the application on those disks. And does that completely automatically, completely regardless of HMCs or service processors involved in here. If we look at the alternative now with remote restart, of course we have lots of LPARs in here rather than a single pair. And the HMC is controlling all this. If it's in the right conditions, then it says detects that the machine is down. Then you can manually decide to do the remote restarts. But first of all, of course, it has to build the logical partition and pass the disks over to these newly built logical partitions. There's no warm standby in here. The application then has to do a cold reboot of the operating system, recover the disks, and restart the application. So quite different scenarios. I've got a sort of hit list in here of the various points of PowerHA as opposed to remote restart. In the PowerHA, these first 5 conditions, application fail, X fail, the virtual machine has failed, or the whole machine is powered or dead, those will all be acted on by PowerHA by the warm standby. In the remote restart case, a lot of these won't actually be noticed. If the VM fails, we could actually manually do a static partition migration ourselves if we spotted that. The one that it does cover here is number 4. The whole machine has failed and powered off, in which case then we get notified that remote restart is possible, and then we can manually go and do that operation. whole load of red in here, things that are very different or not supported with remote restart. I'm just leaving this with you on the slide for a second so that you can have a look at to compare and contrast these two things. It really reminds us how powerful PowerHA is in what it can do and achieve for us for automating recovery from many sorts of problems. We have been talking about fairly simple cases with a low number of machines and low numbers of virtual machines, and life's not going to be too bad. The setup, if we have LPM working already, is fairly easy. The noting the crash, then the HMC will definitely notice. You can get it to email you, for example, or some other alerting tool warning everybody that the machine's down. We have to take some actions. Then you'll have to go through a loop, first of all finding which is the most important virtual machines to get up and running first. Then you have to select some target of where it can go, spare capacity, or perhaps you'll have to switch off some virtual machines and tell the guys using the test virtual machines that they're not important and production takes precedence and knock them down. And then you'll have to be running the SSR, maybe you've got some script to make sure you actually move the right LPAR to the right machine to actually get the work done. Now, if you've got some hand-driven operators doing this operation, then they will be told of the machine failure. They'll get out the manual, look at the procedure, and start the recovery of the production virtual machines as soon as possible. First of all, they'll check that the server is actually still down. It wasn't some transitory problem and the machine is actually coming up. Best just to let it recover and start the workload again. Then they'll be running the commands to actually restart the LPARs on the selected virtual machines, maybe in a sort of priority order to the selected resources. Now this works okay, but in small cases. But if you've got real big computer rooms, many machines, maybe it's a enterprise style machine and 1,000 LPARs have gone down. Imagine having 10 operators and they all got 100 LPARs they're trying to restart. It could be fairly chaotic. So perhaps we should sort of automate this with some scripts. We can use a remote login to the HMC to detect the machine has gone down for enough of a period of time that we think we have to take some action, and then it goes through a list selecting the virtual machines and the target resources to go off and use. Of course, there's some big complications in an automated tool. How to update this, for example, if you're using live partition mobility, the script has to notice that the database isn't on the crash machine anymore, it's gone somewhere else, so we don't have to move it. Perhaps we occasionally want to shut down a machine for maintenance or upgrade, and so we don't want it to kick in while we're doing that operation. What happens if we have two machines fail and we're trying to then move a virtual machine from a failed machine, but the target is the actual one that went down as well? It could be getting into a right old mess in here with mutual dependencies. So this isn't going to really scale very well to hundreds or maybe thousands of virtual machines. Well, the developers thought about this and they came up with a script, rrMonitor. This will give it a source and a target and an LPAR name and an interval of how fast to actually take actions, and it will monitor that particular machine and LPAR and move it if required. There's a little bit of a limitation here that there's one script per LPAR, so if you had 1,000 of them, you'd have 1,000 of these scripts running. Of course, they're not running on a sort of permanent basis, they'll just come in now and again to make their checks. I'm also told that the script does have to run on the HMC, which is normally banned. The HMC is locked down. You're not allowed normally to run scripts and things on the HMC, so you'd have to do that remotely. Now, fortunately, our chmod 666 expert, Benoit, modified the script so that it can run as a remote command. So you run it from another machine, and it logs onto the HMC to actually do its work. And we have a download link. Okay, we're about done. Simplified remote restart. Set up on the HMC, then controlled with HMC or PowerVC. Simple to configure, assuming you're pure virtual machines and you've already got live partition mobility up and running. It requires POWER8. Here's the versions you need, but I would recommend the latest HMC firmware and PowerVC. Excellent. Get a jailfree card. No longer do you have to rebuild by hand your LPARs and connect the disks over. You can get this all automatically done for you, and no further costs once you've got the PowerVM Enterprise Edition, that most people do. Does require some effort and some thought though. If you're large scale deployment, you can't use it as one-stop fix-all for everything. And warning there, no replacement really for PowerHA. It does some things that it does, but HA does a whole lot more. I'll leave you with a whole load of links in here of other places you can go and more information you can get. I'll try and put these links on the YouTube webpage as well, so you can click on them and go directly there. If you've liked this movie, then why not click on the like icon. Thank you.